3 senior boys thought they could humiliate the quiet transfer student in front of the entire cafeteria. They had no idea she was a national taekwondo champion who had been training since she was 5 years old. The fluorescent lights of Jefferson High School cast harsh shadows across the polished linoleum floors as Madison Parker adjusted the straps of her worn leather backpack and took her first tentative steps into what would be her new reality for the next 2 years. The cacophony of slamming lockers, animated conversations, and squeaking sneakers created a symphony of teenage chaos that felt both familiar and utterly foreign at the same time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 17, Madison possessed the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of disciplined training, though most people mistook her reserved demeanor for shyness. Her auburn hair fell in gentle waves just past her shoulders, and her green eyes held a depth of focus that few her age had developed. Standing at 5 feet 6 inches, she had the lean, powerful build of an athlete, but her choice to wear oversized sweaters and loose-fitting jeans effectively concealed the impressive musculature that lay beneath. Madison's family had moved to Clearwater, Texas, when her father David accepted a position as head of pediatric surgery at Clearwater Medical Center. The transition from Austin to this mid-sized town of 60,000 people represented a significant change for the Parker family, leaving behind the anonymity of a major city for a community where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. Decision to relocate had been particularly difficult for Madison, who had spent the last 12 years training at Master Chun's World Champion Taekwondo Academy in Austin. From the age of 5, she had dedicated 4 days a week to perfecting her craft, progressing through the ranks with a combination of natural talent and unwavering determination that had impressed even the most experienced instructors. Master Chun, a former Olympic competitor from South Korea, had taken a special interest in Madison's development from her earliest days at the academy. He recognized in her not just physical ability, but the mental discipline and spiritual focus that separated true martial artists from mere competitors. Under his guidance, Madison had achieved her first-degree black belt at age 12, her second degree at 15, and had been on track for her third degree when the family's move disrupted her training. More significantly, Madison had competed nationally for the past 3 years, earning recognition as one of the top junior taekwondo athletes in the country. Her specialty was sparring, where her combination of lightning-fast kicks and strategic thinking had earned her gold medals at tournaments across Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana. The wall of her bedroom in their Austin home had been covered with certificates, medals, and photographs from competitions, but those reminders of her achievements now sat packed away in boxes in their new house. The philosophy that Master Chun had instilled in Madison went far beyond physical techniques. Taekwondo, he had taught her, was built on 5 tenets: courtesy, integrity, perseverance, self-control, and indomitable spirit. These principles had shaped not just her approach to martial arts, but her entire worldview. Violence was always a last resort, to be used only when all other options had been exhausted and only in defense of oneself or others who could not protect themselves. Madison's mother, Dr. Sarah Parker, was a psychologist who had built a successful private practice in Austin specializing in adolescent therapy. The move to Clearwater meant starting over professionally, but Sarah had been supportive of David's career opportunity while privately worrying about how Madison would adjust to leaving behind not just her training, but the identity she had built. As a competitive athlete, the Parker family had always emphasized the importance of education alongside athletic achievement. Madison maintained a 4.2 GPA while training 20 hours per week, a balance that required exceptional time management and discipline. Her academic strengths lay in mathematics and science, subjects where the logical thinking skills developed through martial arts served her well. Jefferson High School was significantly smaller than Madison's previous school in Austin, with approximately 1,500 students compared to the 3,000 she had been accustomed to. The building itself was newer, constructed in the early 2000s with modern facilities and technology, but the social dynamics felt more intense and claustrophobic than what she had experienced in the anonymity of a larger institution. Madison's first period was advanced placement chemistry with Mrs. Rodriguez, an enthusiastic teacher in her 30s who immediately made an effort to welcome the new student. The lab was well equipped and the coursework appeared challenging, which Madison appreciated. She had always found comfort in the predictability of scientific principles, where effort and understanding reliably produced results. During the class introduction, Mrs. Rodriguez asked Madison to share something about herself with her new classmates. Standing beside the lab bench, Madison felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that accompanied being the center of attention. Her voice was steady but quiet as she explained that her family had moved from Austin due to her father's job, that she enjoyed reading and hiking, and that she was looking forward to exploring what Clearwater had to offer. What she didn't mention was that she had been training in taekwondo for over 12 years, that she held a second-degree black belt, or that she had competed nationally and won numerous championships. The decision to keep her martial arts background private was deliberate. Madison had learned from experience that revealing her abilities often led to unwanted attention, challenges from people seeking to test themselves against her, or assumptions about her personality that didn't match her reality. Her second period was a Calculus with Mr. Thompson, a veteran teacher who had been at Jefferson High for over 20 years. The mathematical concepts were familiar territory for Madison, whose analytical mind had always excelled at problem solving. She found herself seated next to a student named Tyler Rodriguez, who seemed genuinely friendly and offered to help her navigate the school's layout. Tyler was a junior like Madison, with dark hair and an easy smile that immediately put her at ease. He was involved in the school's robotics team and shared Madison's appreciation for mathematics and engineering. During their brief conversation before class began, Tyler mentioned that Jefferson High had a strong academic reputation and a variety of extracurricular activities, though he noted that the social hierarchy could be somewhat rigid. "The school's not too bad once you figure out how everything works," Tyler explained quietly as Mr. Thompson distributed worksheets. "Most people are pretty friendly, though there are definitely some groups you want to avoid if possible. The athletic crowd can be pretty intense, especially some of the football players who think they run the place." Madison nodded, filing away the information while wondering how different the social dynamics would be from her previous school. In Austin, her reputation as a competitive athlete had provided a certain level of protection from bullying, as most students recognized and respected her achievements. Here, she was starting completely fresh, with no established reputation or social connections. Third period brought her to American literature with Miss Foster, a young teacher who had recently graduated from the University of Texas and brought an infectious enthusiasm to her classroom. The current unit focused on themes of heroism and moral courage in American literature, examining how ordinary people could rise to extraordinary circumstances when faced with challenges that tested their principles. The irony of studying fictional heroes while carefully concealing her own capabilities was not lost on Madison. She had always been drawn to stories of individuals who used their abilities to protect others, but she had also learned that real-life heroism was far more complicated than literary examples suggested. The consequences of intervention could be unpredictable, and the line between helpful and harmful action was often blurrier than authors portrayed. Madison's lunch period provided her first real glimpse into Jefferson High's social ecosystem. The cafeteria was divided into clearly defined territories, with different groups claiming specific areas based on shared interests, athletic participation, or social status. She observed the layout carefully while purchasing a sandwich and bottle of water, Noting the relationships and hierarchies that governed student interactions, the athletic tables dominated the center of the cafeteria, with football players occupying the most prominent positions. Basketball and soccer players filled adjacent tables, while swimmers, tennis players, and track athletes claimed smaller sections nearby. Academic clubs and honor society members gathered near the windows, while various other social groups filled in the remaining spaces according to their own complex organizational principles. Madison chose a small table near the edge of the cafeteria, positioning herself where she could observe the room's dynamics without attracting attention. She pulled out a book on advanced physics that she had been reading for pleasure, hoping that appearing occupied would discourage unwanted social interactions while she adjusted to her new environment. Her strategy worked initially, allowing her to eat in peaceful solitude while mentally cataloging the various personalities and relationships that would shape her experience at Jefferson High. However, about halfway through the lunch period, her quiet observation was interrupted by the arrival of Tyler Rodriguez, who approached her table with a friendly smile and a lunch tray of his own. "Mind if I sit here?" Tyler asked, though he was already settling into the chair across from her. "I noticed you were eating alone and thought you might appreciate some company. Plus, I promised myself I'd help the new student feel welcome, and I take my promises seriously." Madison appreciated Tyler's easygoing nature and genuine friendliness. Their conversation flowed naturally as they discussed their shared classes, their impressions of Jefferson High's academic programs, and their respective backgrounds. Tyler had lived in Clearwater his entire life but had traveled extensively with his family, giving him a broader perspective than many of his classmates. When Tyler asked about Madison's interests and hobbies, she carefully steered the conversation toward safer topics like reading, hiking, and academic subjects. She mentioned that she had enjoyed outdoor activities in Austin and was looking forward to exploring the natural areas around Clearwater, but she made no reference to her years of competitive athletic training. "There are some great hiking trails about 20 minutes outside of town," Tyler offered. "If you're interested, I could show you some of the better spots once you get settled. I spend a lot of time outdoors when I'm not working on robotics projects or studying. It's one of the advantages of living in a smaller town. You're never far from nature." Madison found herself genuinely enjoying Tyler's company and beginning to feel optimistic about her prospects for making friends at Jefferson High. His offer to show her local hiking trails was particularly appealing, as she had always found solace in outdoor activities and physical challenges that allowed her to maintain her fitness without revealing her martial arts background. However, their pleasant conversation was interrupted by a commotion from the center of the cafeteria, where a group of senior boys had apparently decided to entertain themselves at the expense of a younger student. Madison's attention was immediately drawn to the situation, her years of training having conditioned her to notice potential conflicts and assess them for signs of escalation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The target of their attention appeared to be a sophomore girl who had been sitting alone at a nearby table, quietly working on homework while eating her lunch. She was petite and shy-looking, with glasses and brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Madison could see the fear in the girl's eyes as the older boys surrounded her table, their body language aggressive and intimidating. Madison felt the familiar surge of protective instinct that Master Chun had taught her to recognize and control. Every fiber of her being wanted to intervene, to use her skills to protect someone who clearly couldn't defend herself against multiple larger opponents. But she also remembered her parents' concerns about maintaining a low profile in their new community, and Master Chun's teachings about the responsibility that came with her abilities. Tyler noticed Madison's attention had shifted and followed her gaze to the developing situation. His expression grew troubled as he observed the scene unfolding at the center of the cafeteria. "That's Derek Hamilton and his crew," Tyler explained quietly, his voice carrying a note of disgust. "They're seniors on the football team who seem to think that gives them the right to torment anyone they consider beneath them. The girl they're bothering is Jessica Chun. She's actually really smart, but incredibly shy. They've been picking on her since she started here." Madison watched as Derek Hamilton, a tall boy with blonde hair and the kind of aggressive confidence that often masked deep insecurity, leaned over Jessica's table and made comments that were clearly intended to humiliate and intimidate. His companions, two other football players whose names Madison didn't yet know, flanked him with the practiced coordination of individuals who had engaged in this type of behavior many times before. The situation escalated quickly as Derek reached for Jessica's homework, crumpling the papers she had been working on and tossing them toward a nearby trash can. Jessica's quiet plea for him to stop only seemed to encourage the boys, who laughed at her distress and moved closer to her table. Madison's hands clenched involuntarily as she watched Jessica's obvious fear and humiliation. Master Chun's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her that true strength was measured not by one's ability to harm others, but by one's commitment to protecting those who could not protect themselves. The 5 tenets of Taekwondo demanded that she act with courtesy, integrity, perseverance, self-control, and indomitable spirit. But Madison also understood that revealing her capabilities on her first day at a new school could have far-reaching consequences for both herself and her family. Her parents had sacrificed considerably to give her this fresh start, and her mother's practice and her father's position at the medical center could be affected by any drama she might create. As she wrestled with the competing demands of her principles and her practical concerns, Madison made a decision that would ultimately prove to be temporary. She would observe for now, gather more information about the school's social dynamics and the individuals involved, and look for opportunities to help Jessica in ways that didn't require direct confrontation. However, even as she made this calculated decision, Madison knew that her ability to remain passive in the face of injustice was limited. Master Chun had trained her not just in physical techniques, but in the moral obligations that came with possessing the ability to defend others. Sooner or later, those obligations would override her desire to maintain a low profile. The lunch period ended with Jessica Chun gathering her scattered belongings while fighting back tears, and Derek Hamilton's group dispersing with the satisfied expressions of predators who had successfully established their dominance. Madison watched Jessica hurry from the cafeteria alone, and she felt a familiar determination building within her. Tyler noticed Madison's continued focus on the aftermath of the incident. "I know it's hard to watch," he said sympathetically, "but Derek and his friends have been doing this kind of thing for years. The teachers either don't see it or choose not to get involved, and most students are too scared to speak up. It's just the way things work around here." Madison nodded silently, but internally she was already planning. Tomorrow will be different. She might be the new student, but she wasn't powerless, and she certainly wasn't going to stand by while someone like Jessica Chun suffered in silence. Her 12 years of training had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. As the bell rang and students began filing out of the cafeteria toward their afternoon classes, Madison Parker began the careful process of transforming from anonymous transfer student to guardian angel. The only question was how long she could maintain her cover before Derek Hamilton and his friends forced her to reveal the true extent of her capabilities. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows of Jefferson High's main hallway as Madison navigated toward her 4th period advanced biology class. The earlier incident in the cafeteria continued to weigh on her mind, but she was determined to learn more about the school's social dynamics before making any decisions about intervention. Biology proved to be taught by Dr. Williams, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and tired eyes who had clearly been teaching for many years. The class was studying cellular metabolism, And Madison found herself paired with a quiet girl named Amanda, foster for a lab exercise involving enzyme reactions. Amanda had shoulder-length black hair and wore clothes that seemed deliberately chosen to avoid attention. As they worked together measuring pH levels and recording data, Madison noticed that Amanda kept glancing nervously toward the back of the classroom where several of Derek Hamilton's friends were loudly discussing weekend plans instead of focusing on their assignment. "Are you okay?" Madison asked quietly as they waited for their test solution to reach the correct temperature. Amanda looked surprised that someone had noticed her discomfort. "Oh, it's nothing really. It's just that Brad Morrison is back there. She gestured subtly toward one of the football players. "He and his girlfriend Kelly broke up last week, and now he keeps making comments about how I should go out with him since I'm available and desperate enough. I keep telling him I'm not interested, but he won't drop it." Madison observed Brad Morrison surreptitiously. He was a large boy with brown hair and the kind of aggressive swagger that seemed common among Derek Hamilton's circle. Even from across the classroom, his body language radiated entitlement and barely controlled aggression. "Have you talked to Dr. Williams about it?" Madison suggested. Amanda shook her head quickly. "Brad's father is on the school board, and his older brother graduated here as valedictorian before going to Stanford on a football scholarship. The Morrison family basically built the new gymnasium 2 years ago. Teachers don't want to hear complaints about Brad unless he does something really obvious." The pattern was becoming clearer to Madison. Derek Hamilton's group wasn't just a collection of random bullies. They were the sons of influential families who had built a system where their behavior was protected by money, connections, and institutional indifference. The school administration had apparently decided that maintaining relationships with wealthy donors was more important than protecting vulnerable students. During the remainder of the biology class, Madison observed the classroom dynamics more carefully. Dr. Williams clearly favored the popular students, calling on them more frequently and accepting lower quality work from athletes who claimed they were too busy with practice to complete assignments properly. Meanwhile, students like Amanda worked diligently but received minimal recognition for their efforts. When Brad Morrison's group became too disruptive during the final 15 minutes of class, Dr. Williams simply moved to the other side of the room rather than addressing their behavior. Madison watched Amanda's shoulders tense as Brad made increasingly inappropriate comments about her appearance. But the teacher's studied ignorance made it clear that no help would be coming from official channels. Madison's fifth period was American history with Coach Peterson, who also served as the school's head football coach. The dual role explained a great deal about the athletic program's influence within the school's power structure. Coach Peterson was a man in his late 40s with graying temples and the kind of commanding presence that came from years of leading football teams to regional championships. The classroom walls were covered with photographs of successful football teams, championship trophies, and newspaper clippings, celebrating the athletic achievements that had brought recognition to Jefferson High. Academic accomplishments were notably absent from the display, sending a clear message about what the school truly valued. Madison found herself seated near Derek Hamilton, who had apparently chosen American history as an easy credit that wouldn't interfere with his football training schedule. From her new vantage point, she could observe Derek's interactions with his teammates and assess the group dynamics that made their bullying behavior so effective. Derek was clearly the leader, possessing a combination of physical size, family, wealth, and strategic intelligence that allowed him to maintain control over his circle of followers. His two closest associates were Brad Morrison and Kevin Walsh, both seniors who seemed to compete for Derek's approval through increasingly aggressive behavior toward students they perceived as weak or different. Kevin Walsh was perhaps the most disturbing member of the group. Where Derek's bullying seemed calculated and strategic, Kevin appeared to genuinely enjoy causing pain and humiliation. He was smaller than Derek and Brad, but made up for his size with a cruel creativity that manifested in psychological torture rather than direct physical confrontation. Coach Peterson's lecture on World War II military strategy, Madison. Listen to the quiet conversation taking place between Derek and his friends. They were discussing their plans for after school, specifically their intention to have some fun with Jessica Chun, the shy sophomore they had targeted during lunch. She always takes the long way around the building to avoid walking past the gym, Kevin was whispering. If we position ourselves near the science wing exit, we can intercept her before she reaches the bus loop. Brad nodded eagerly. My cousin Marcus graduated last year, but he still comes by after school sometimes. He'd probably think it was hilarious. If we got the new girl to do something embarrassing. You know how these quiet types get when they're really scared. Madison's jaw tightened as she realized they were planning to escalate their harassment of Jessica Chun. The mention of involving an older student who was no longer even enrolled at the school suggested they were prepared to cross lines that would move their behavior from bullying to potentially criminal territory. Derek's response was even more troubling. We need to be smart about this. Can't leave any evidence that could get back to administration. But I'm thinking it's time little Jessica learned what happens when she doesn't show proper respect to her betters. The casual way Derek discussed planning psychological torture revealed the depth of his sociopathic tendencies. This wasn't random teenage cruelty, it was systematic predatory behavior that had clearly been refined through years of practice and institutional protection. Coach Peterson concluded his lecture by assigning a research project on military leadership, praising the football players for their natural understanding of strategy and teamwork while barely acknowledging the other students in the class. The favoritism was so blatant that Madison began to understand why Derek's group felt empowered to behave with such impunity. Madison's final class of the day was a P Physics with Mr. Davis, a young teacher who had recently completed his master's degree and brought genuine enthusiasm to his subject matter. The classroom environment was noticeably different, with Mr. Davis treating all students with equal respect and maintaining high academic standards regardless of their extracurricular activities. However, even in this more equitable environment, the toxic influence of Derek's group was evident. They arrived late, disrupted the lesson with side conversations, and made dismissive comments about students who asked thoughtful questions. Mr. Davis attempted to maintain order, but his youth and relative inexperience made him less effective at controlling students who clearly had no respect for authority. During a break in the lesson, Madison overheard Derek and Brad discussing their plans in more detail. They had apparently done this before, targeting students who were isolated and unlikely to report their harassment. Jessica Chun fit their preferred victim profile perfectly: shy, academically focused, and lacking the social connections that might provide protection. Remember what happened to that Sarah girl last semester? Kevin was saying with obvious satisfaction. After our little conversation behind the auditorium, she transferred to private school. Her parents never even knew why she wanted to leave so badly. The revelation that Derek's group had already driven at least one student from Jefferson High through systematic harassment confirmed Madison's growing understanding of the situation. This wasn't isolated bullying. It was a pattern of predatory behavior that had been ongoing for years, enabled by administrative indifference and protected by family influence. As the final bell rang at 3:15, Madison gathered her belongings slowly while observing Derek's group as they prepared to execute their plan. They moved with the practiced coordination of individuals who had engaged in this type of operation many times before, splitting up to cover different exits and ensure that Jessica Chen couldn't escape their attention. Madison's years of taekwondo training had taught her to recognize predatory behavior and assess tactical situations quickly. Derek's group was employing classic hunting techniques, surrounding their prey, cutting off escape routes, and ensuring that the confrontation would occur in an isolated location where witnesses would be minimal. The moral imperative to intervene was becoming impossible to ignore. Master Chun's teachings about the responsibility of strength echoed in Madison's mind as she watched Derek Hamilton's group prepare to psychologically torture a defenseless sophomore. Every principle of Taekwondo demanded that she act to protect Jessica Chun, regardless of the consequences for her own carefully maintained anonymity. Madison made her way toward her locker, keeping Derek's group in her peripheral vision while appearing to focus on organizing her homework for the evening. She could see Jessica Chun at her own locker near the science wing, completely unaware that she was being stalked by 3 seniors who viewed her suffering as entertainment. The hallways began to empty as students headed toward buses, cars, and after-school activities. Madison realized that Jessica's isolation was working against her. Within 10 minutes, the corridors would be largely deserted, providing Derek's group with the privacy they needed to escalate their harassment without fear of interruption. As Madison closed her locker and shouldered her backpack, she made a decision that would fundamentally alter her experience at Jefferson High School. She had spent one day observing the system, understanding the power dynamics, and hoping that someone else would step up to protect the vulnerable students who were being systematically targeted. That hope had proven naive. The adults were either complicit or powerless. The other students were too frightened to intervene. And Derek Hamilton's group operated with the confidence of predators who had never faced meaningful consequences for their behavior. Madison Parker had been trained for 12 years to use her abilities in defense of others. She had won national championships through discipline, strategy, and an indomitable spirit that refused to accept defeat. More importantly, she had been taught that true strength was measured not by one's ability to harm others, but by one's willingness to protect those who could not protect themselves. Walking toward the science wing, where Jessica Chun was unknowingly heading into an ambush, Madison felt the familiar calm settling over her mind that always preceded serious competition. This wouldn't be a tournament with rules and referees, but the principles remained the same. Identify your opponent's weaknesses, maintain your center, and never give up until the objective was achieved. Derek Hamilton and his friends were about to discover that their newest target was not the helpless transfer student they had assumed. They were about to face a national champion who had spent over a decade preparing for exactly this type of confrontation. The only question was whether they would be smart enough to recognize their mistake before it was too late to avoid the consequences. Science wing of Jefferson High emptied rapidly as students rushed toward their buses and rides home, leaving behind only the echoing footsteps of stragglers and the distant sound of locker doors slamming shut. Madison moved purposefully through the corridors, her trained senses alert to every sound and movement as she tracked the developing situation ahead. Jessica Chun appeared around the corner from the chemistry labs, her arms full of textbooks, and her backpack struggling to contain what appeared to be several days' worth of assignments. She moved with the hurried pace of someone who preferred to avoid attention, keeping her eyes down and navigating the hallway with the practiced efficiency of a student who had learned to make herself invisible. Madison positioned herself near a bank of lockers where she could observe without being obvious, watching as Derek Hamilton emerged from the main hallway with Brad Morrison flanking him on the left. Kevin Walsh had apparently taken a different route because Madison could see him approaching from the direction of the gymnasium, effectively cutting off Jessica's most direct path to the bus loading area. The coordination was impressive in its calculated cruelty. Derek's group had clearly done this before, timing their movements to create an inescapable trap for their target. Jessica had no way of knowing that her normal route home had been turned into an ambush, and by the time she realized what was happening, retreat would be impossible. Madison felt her heart rate increase as the tactical situation crystallized in her mind. Master Chen had always emphasized the importance of environmental awareness in self-defense situations, teaching her to recognize when escape routes were being eliminated and opponents were maneuvering for maximum advantage. The boys weren't just planning to embarrass Jessica. They were implementing a sophisticated strategy designed to ensure complete control over the encounter. Jessica rounded the final corner before the science wing exit, her focus on the heavy textbooks in her arms rather than the danger ahead. She was less than 30 feet from Derek when she finally looked up and saw him blocking her path, his two companions moving to flank her position with military precision. Well, Derek's voice carried clearly down the empty hallway, his tone friendly but with underlying menace that made Madison's skin crawl. If it isn't little Jessica Chun, trying to sneak out without saying goodbye to her new friends. Jessica stopped abruptly, her books clenched tighter against her chest as she quickly assessed her situation. Madison could see the moment of recognition in the sophomore's eyes as she realized she was trapped, her gaze darting between Derek directly ahead and his companions who had now moved to block any retreat. I need to catch my bus," Jessica stammered, her voice barely audible even in the empty hallway. "My mom is expecting me home by 4, and if I miss this one, I'll have to walk." Kevin Walsh laughed, the sound sharp and cruel in the enclosed space. "Your mommy's expecting you? That's so sweet. Maybe we should call her and let her know you're going to be a little late. We have some important school business to discuss with you." Madison watched Jessica's face pale as Kevin pulled out his phone and waved it mockingly. The psychological torture was beginning exactly as Madison had expected, with the boys using Jessica's obvious fear and social anxiety as weapons against her. They weren't interested in a quick confrontation. They wanted to savor her terror and humiliation. "Please." Jessica tried again, her voice stronger but still shaking. "I haven't done anything wrong. I just want to go home." Derek stepped closer, using his height advantage to loom over the much smaller girl. "See, that's where you're wrong, Jessica. You did do something wrong. You've been walking around our school for 2 years now without ever showing proper respect to the people who matter. You act like you're too good to acknowledge us, like you think being smart makes you better than everyone else." The accusation was absurd, and Madison could see that Jessica was struggling to understand what Derek was talking about. The sophomore had been doing exactly what Madison herself had tried to do, keeping a low profile and avoiding conflict through anonymity. But Derek's twisted logic had apparently interpreted her shyness as arrogance, her academic focus as condescension. Brad Morrison moved closer from Jessica's left side, his bulk effectively eliminating any chance she might have had to dart around Derek. "We've been watching you, Jessica. Always sitting by yourself, never talking to anyone, acting like you're too special for the rest of us. It's time someone taught you some humility." Madison felt her hands clenching involuntarily as she watched the 3 seniors begin their systematic psychological assault. Every instinct screamed at her to intervene immediately, but Master Chun's tactical training held her back for crucial seconds as she assessed the situation completely. Moving too early could actually make things worse for Jessica if the boys simply postponed their harassment to a more private location. The hallway was now completely empty except for the 5 students involved in the confrontation. The buses would begin loading in approximately 10 minutes, giving Derek's group a comfortable window to complete whatever they had planned. Most importantly, there were no teachers or administrators in sight. The attack had been timed to occur during the brief period when adult supervision was minimal. "You know what I think?" Kevin Walsh said, circling around behind Jessica like a predator toying with wounded prey. "I think Jessica needs to learn some social skills. Maybe we should teach her how to properly greet people when she sees them in the hallway." Derek's smile widened as he caught Kevin's implication. "That's a great idea. Jessica, from now on, whenever you see any of us in the hallway, you're going to stop whatever you're doing and give us a proper greeting. And I think a nice curtsy would be appropriate, don't you think?" Jessica's confusion was evident as she tried to process the ridiculous demand. A curtsy? I don't understand what you want from me. It's simple, Brad Morrison chimed in, clearly enjoying Jessica's bewilderment. When you see us, you stop, you smile, and you give us a nice deep curtsy. Like a proper little servant girl acknowledging her betters. The demand was designed to be humiliating while remaining technically non-violent, allowing Derek's group to claim they were just having fun if questioned by authorities. But Madison could see the deeper psychological warfare at work. They were attempting to establish a pattern of submission that would make Jessica an easy target for future harassment. Madison's internal struggle reached a critical point as she watched Jessica's eyes fill with tears of frustration and fear. The sophomore was clearly trying to find some way to escape the situation without giving in to the boys' demands, but her options were rapidly disappearing as they moved closer and became more aggressive in their body language. Come on, Jessica, Derek said, his voice taking on a tone of false reasonableness. Just one little curtsy and we'll let you run along to your bus. It's not such a big deal, is it? Unless you really do think you're too good for us. The manipulation was expertly crafted, designed to make Jessica feel like compliance was the reasonable choice while resistance would mark her as arrogant and deserving of worse treatment. Madison recognized the technique from her mother's psychology training. It was a classic method of breaking down a victim's resistance by making surrender seem logical. Jessica took a shaky breath, and Madison could see that the sophomore was actually considering giving in to their demands. The realization that this brave, intelligent girl was about to be forced into a humiliating act of submission purely for Derek's entertainment finally pushed Madison past her breaking point. Master Chun's voice echoed in her memory from a lesson 3 years earlier. The greatest dishonor in Taekwondo is not losing a fight. It is failing to fight when fighting is necessary to protect the innocent. Madison stepped out from behind the lockers where she had been observing, her movement fluid and controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Excuse me, she said clearly, her voice carrying down the hallway with the kind of quiet authority that made all 4 students turn toward her. Derek's group was clearly surprised by the interruption, having believed they had chosen their location and timing carefully enough to avoid witnesses. Derek himself recovered first, his expression shifting to one of annoyance mixed with calculation as he assessed this new variable in his plan. Well, look who decided to join the party, Derek said, his tone attempting casual dismissal while his body language remained focused on maintaining control over Jessica, the new girl from Austin. This doesn't concern you, so why don't you just keep walking? Madison continued her approach, noting the positioning of all 3 boys and automatically calculating angles of attack, escape routes, and potential weapons in the environment. Her training had made such tactical assessment as automatic as breathing, though she hoped the situation could still be resolved without violence. Actually, it does concern me, Madison replied calmly, stopping about 10 feet from the group while maintaining optimal positioning for rapid movement in any direction. Jessica, are these boys bothering you? The question was simple, but it represented a fundamental challenge to the power dynamic Derek had been carefully constructing. By addressing Jessica directly and treating her as someone whose opinion mattered, Madison was undermining the entire premise of the harassment. Jessica looked between Madison and Derek's group, clearly torn between relief at having support and terror that involving someone else might make her situation worse. They want me to ... She began, then stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Kevin. Walsh stepped forward aggressively, apparently viewing Madison's intervention as a direct challenge to his authority. She wants you to mind your own business and keep walking, new girl. This is a private conversation between friends. Madison met Kevin's gaze steadily, and something in her expression made him unconsciously take a step backward. Years of competitive sparring had taught her to project confidence even when facing larger opponents, and that psychological presence was having its intended effect. "Jessica," Madison said, keeping her voice gentle but clear, "you don't have to do anything these boys are asking. If you want to leave, we can walk to the buses together." The offer was simple and reasonable, but it represented a complete rejection of Derek's attempt to establish dominance over Jessica. By presenting an alternative to submission, Madison was forcing the boys to either escalate to actual violence or accept that their psychological manipulation had failed. Derek's face flushed with anger as he realized his carefully planned harassment was being disrupted by someone who refused to be intimidated. "Listen, Austin girl, you've been here exactly 1 day. You don't understand how things work around here, and you don't want to make enemies in your first week." The threat was clear, but Madison found herself surprisingly calm as she processed Derek's words. This was the moment Master Chun had prepared her for, the point where peaceful resolution was no longer possible, and a choice had to be made between standing up for what was right or allowing injustice to continue. "You're right," Madison said quietly, her voice carrying a new note of steel that made all 3 boys pause. "I have been here exactly 1 day. But that's long enough to see that you 3 enjoy picking on people who can't defend themselves. And I think that makes you cowards." The word hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet, impossible to ignore or dismiss. Derek's group had built their reputations on being feared and respected, and being called cowards by a girl they had assumed was helpless represented a direct challenge to everything they believed about themselves. Brad Morrison stepped forward, his face red with anger. "Nobody talks to us like that, especially not some skinny transfer student who thinks she's hot stuff because she came from the big city." Madison felt the familiar calm settling over her mind as the confrontation moved past the point of peaceful resolution. She had tried diplomacy, had offered Jessica a way out that didn't require violence, and had given Derek's group multiple opportunities to back down gracefully. They had chosen escalation instead, and now Madison Parker was going to show them exactly what 12 years of championship-level taekwondo training looked like when applied in defense of the innocent. "Jessica," Madison said calmly, never taking her eyes off Derek's group, "please step behind me." Jessica Chun quickly moved behind Madison, her relief palpable as she finally had someone willing to stand between her and her tormentors. The shift in positioning fundamentally altered the dynamics of the confrontation, transforming it from 3 seniors intimidating a helpless sophomore into a face-off between Madison and Derek's group. Derek Hamilton's expression darkened as he processed this new development. Throughout his high school career, he had carefully chosen victims who were isolated and unlikely to attract defenders. Madison's willingness to intervene represented a variable he hadn't anticipated, and her calm confidence suggested she might be more formidable than her appearance indicated. "Bad choice, new girl," Derek said, his voice carrying the kind of controlled menace that had intimidated countless students over the years. "You just made this everybody's problem instead of just Jessica's. Now you both get to learn what happens when someone disrespects the natural order around here." Madison remained perfectly still, her body language relaxed but ready. Master Chun had taught her that most confrontations were won or lost in the psychological phase before any physical contact occurred. Confidence, positioning, and the ability to remain calm under pressure often determined outcomes more than raw physical ability. "The only thing I see here," Madison replied evenly, "is 3 boys who think their size gives them the right to terrorize someone half their weight. Where I come from, we call that cowardice." The insult hit its mark, and Madison could see Kevin Walsh's hands clenched into fists. Of the 3 boys, Kevin appeared to have the least self-control, which made him both the most dangerous and the most predictable opponent. His emotional volatility would make him likely to attack first, but it would also cause him to telegraph his intentions clearly. Brad Morrison stepped closer, apparently trying to use his considerable bulk to intimidate Madison through proximity. "You've got a real smart mouth for someone who's about to get her ass kicked." Maybe after we're done with you, you'll understand why keeping quiet is usually the smart play." The threat was explicit enough that Madison could now justify defending herself under any reasonable interpretation of self-defense law. However, she also understood that using her full capabilities against untrained opponents could result in serious injuries that would have legal consequences for both herself and her family. Master Chun had always emphasized that a true martial artist used only the minimum force necessary to resolve a conflict. The challenge would be calibrating her response to neutralize the threat without causing permanent damage to her attackers. "Last chance," Derek announced, his tone suggesting he was enjoying the build-up to violence. "Walk away now, forget you saw anything here, and we'll pretend this conversation never happened. Keep pushing, and things are going to get very unpleasant very quickly." Madison glanced quickly around the hallway, noting the absence of security cameras in this particular section of the science wing. Derek's choice of location had been strategic. Whatever happened here would come down to competing testimonies rather than objective evidence. The boys had clearly planned for the possibility that their activities might need to be concealed from school authorities. "Jessica," Madison said quietly, never taking her eyes off Derek's group, "when this starts, I want you to run toward the main office and find the first teacher you can. Don't look back, and don't try to help. Just get to safety and bring back." An adult. Jessica's whispered "okay" was barely audible, but Madison caught the determination in her voice. The sophomore understood that Madison was about to put herself at risk for someone she barely knew, and that knowledge seemed to strengthen Jessica's resolve to play her part in the escape plan. Derek laughed harshly at Madison's instructions. "Run to the office? That's cute. But I think you're misunderstanding the situation here. Nobody's running anywhere until we're satisfied that the proper lessons have been learned." Kevin Walsh had been growing more agitated during the verbal sparring, and Madison could see that his patience was finally exhausted. "Enough talking," he snarled, lunging forward with his hands reaching for Madison's shoulders in what appeared to be an attempt to grab and shake her. Madison's response was so fluid and economical that most observers would have missed the technical details. As Kevin's hands approached her shoulders, she stepped slightly to her left while raising her right arm in a classic taekwondo block that deflected his grab while simultaneously striking his extended wrist with enough force to numb his entire arm. Kevin stumbled past Madison's position, his momentum carrying him several steps beyond where she had been standing. The surprised expression on his face suggested he was still trying to process how his attack had failed so completely when Madison's perfectly timed back kick caught him in the solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs and sending him crashing into a bank of lockers. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds, and Kevin Walsh was now sitting on the floor, gasping for breath while clutching his stomach. Madison had returned to her original position as if nothing had happened, her breathing steady and her attention focused on Derek and Brad. "Kevin!" Brad Morrison shouted, his shock evident as he stared at his friend's unexpected defeat. "What the hell just happened?" Derek's expression had shifted from confidence to wariness as he processed what he had just witnessed. Madison's movements had been too smooth and precise to be lucky, suggesting a level of training that neither he nor his friends were prepared to handle. "Interesting," Derek said slowly, his tone more respectful than it had been moments earlier. "Looks like our new friend has some surprises." Kevin always was a little too eager for his own good. Madison remained silent, allowing Derek to draw his own conclusions about her capabilities while she assessed the changing tactical situation. With Kevin temporarily out of action, the odds had improved significantly, but Derek and Brad were both larger and potentially more dangerous opponents than Kevin had been. More importantly, Derek's increased caution suggested he was beginning to think strategically rather than simply relying on intimidation. A smart opponent was often more dangerous than an angry one, especially when they had numerical advantage and superior size. "Jessica, go now," Madison said firmly, and the sophomore immediately began moving toward the main hallway. Brad Morrison started to intercept her, but Madison shifted her position slightly, making it clear that any attempt to pursue Jessica would require going through her first. Brad hesitated, clearly torn between following Derek's original plan and avoiding the kind of embarrassing defeat that Kevin had just experienced. The hesitation gave Jessica enough time to reach the corner and disappear from view, leaving Madison facing Derek and Brad in the increasingly empty science wing. "Well, that's inconvenient," Derek observed, his tone suggesting mild annoyance, rather than real concern. "Looks like we'll have to adjust our approach. Brad, why don't you see if you can catch up with little Jessica while I have a private conversation with our martial arts expert here?" The suggestion revealed Derek's strategic thinking. By splitting his forces, he could potentially achieve his original objective of terrorizing Jessica, while also dealing with Madison's unexpected resistance. It was actually a smart tactical decision that played to their advantages in size and numbers. However, Madison had anticipated exactly this type of maneuver. "Brad's not going anywhere," she said calmly, positioning herself to block the hallway completely. "This ends here with all of us, or it doesn't end at all." Brad Morrison looked between Madison and Derek, clearly uncertain about how to proceed. His friend Kevin was still struggling to catch his breath, and Madison's casual confidence suggested she was prepared for whatever they might try next. "You're really starting to annoy me," Derek said, his friendly facade finally dropping to reveal the cold calculation beneath. "I don't know what kind of training you've had, but this isn't some tournament with rules and referees. This is the real world, where size and strength matter more than fancy techniques." Derek's assessment was partially correct. Street fights were indeed different from tournament competition. However, his assumption that Madison's training was purely sport-oriented revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of Taekwondo's practical applications. Master Chun had always emphasized that real self-defense required adapting techniques to circumstances where there were no rules protecting either participant. "You're right," Madison agreed, her voice taking on a harder edge. "This isn't a tournament, which means I don't have to hold back or worry about point scoring. Are you sure you want to find out what that looks like?" The question hung in the air as Derek processed Madison's words and their implications. For the first time since the confrontation began, he seemed to be genuinely considering the possibility that attacking Madison might not result in the easy victory he had anticipated. Kevin Walsh had finally recovered enough breath to speak, though he remained seated against the lockers. "Derek, man, I don't know what kind of training she has, but that wasn't normal. Nobody moves that fast unless they really know what they're doing." The admission from Kevin carried weight because he had been the first to experience Madison's capabilities directly. His testimony that her skills were legitimate rather than lucky gave Derek new information to consider as he planned his next move. Brad Morrison was growing more agitated as the standoff continued. "Are we really going to let one girl scare us off? She got lucky with Kevin, but there's still two of us and one of her. We can't let word get out that we backed down from some transfer student." The concern about reputation was clearly weighing heavily on Derek's decision-making process. His entire social position at Jefferson High was built on the perception that he and Pooh, his friends, were the apex predators in the school's ecosystem. Being defeated or even deterred by Madison would fundamentally undermine that carefully constructed image. "Brad's got a point," Derek said finally, his tone suggesting he had reached a decision. "We can't let this slide, regardless of whatever black belt credentials our new friend might have. Sometimes you have to take risks to maintain respect." Madison could see Derek's body language shifting as he prepared for action. Unlike Kevin's impulsive charge, Derek's approach would likely be more calculated and coordinated with Brad. The two boys had been friends for years and had probably worked together in previous confrontations. "Last warning," Madison said, her voice carrying the quiet authority that came from complete confidence in her abilities. "Walk away now, leave Jessica alone, and we can all pretend this never happened. Keep pushing. And I guarantee you won't. Like how this ends." Derek smiled, but there was no humor in the expression. "You know what? I think I'm willing to take that risk. Brad, when I move, you go left. Let's see how good she really is when she has to deal with both of us at once." The coordination attempt was exactly what Madison had expected, and she had already formulated her response before Derek finished speaking. Master Chun had spent countless hours drilling her on multiple opponent scenarios, emphasizing the importance of positioning, timing, and using opponents' movements against each other. As Derek and Brad began their coordinated attack, Madison felt the familiar calm settling over her mind that always preceded serious competition. The boys were bigger and stronger, but they were also untrained and overconfident. More importantly, they had made the critical mistake of underestimating an opponent whose capabilities they didn't understand. Derek, Hamilton, and Brad Morrison were about to receive a very painful education in the difference between bullying helpless victims and facing someone who had spent 12 years preparing for exactly this type of confrontation. The real fight was about to begin. Derek, Hamilton, and Brad Morrison moved simultaneously, their coordination the result of years of friendship and shared aggression against weaker targets. Derek approached from Madison's right while Brad circled left, both boys attempting to use their size advantage to overwhelm her. Through sheer physical presence and coordinated pressure, Madison's response demonstrated why Master Chun had spent countless hours drilling multiple opponent scenarios. Instead of retreating or trying to defend against both attackers simultaneously, she moved forward and to her right, directly toward Derek's advance. The counterintuitive movement allowed her to engage one opponent while using his body to shield her from the other's attack. Derek, expecting Madison to retreat or move away from his charge, was caught off guard when she stepped into his attack range. His reaching grab met only empty air as Madison ducked under his extended arms and drove her shoulder into his midsection, using his own momentum to amplify the impact of her strike. The technique was pure taekwondo, efficient, precise, and devastatingly effective. Derek doubled over as the air rushed from his lungs, his forward momentum carrying him past Madison's position while she pivoted smoothly to face Brad. Morrison's follow-up attack. Brad had committed to a wide swing aimed at where Madison had been standing, but her movement toward Derek had left him punching air while off balance and overextended. Madison's spinning heel kick caught him in the ribs with a sharp crack that echoed through the empty hallway, sending him stumbling sideways into the wall. The entire exchange had taken less than 5 seconds, but it had fundamentally altered the dynamics of the confrontation. Derek was bent over trying to catch his breath. Brad was leaning against the wall clutching his ribs, and Kevin Walsh remained seated on the floor watching with wide-eyed amazement. Madison returned to her centered stance, her breathing controlled and her attention focused on all 3 boys simultaneously. The demonstration of her capabilities had been necessary to establish credibility, but she hoped it might also convince them that continued aggression would only result in more painful lessons. "Are we done here?" Madison asked calmly, her tone suggesting she was prepared to continue if necessary. "Because I can keep going all day if that's what it takes to get through to you." Derek straightened slowly, his face flushed with a combination of physical discomfort and wounded pride. Throughout his high school career, he had never encountered anyone who could match his intimidation tactics with superior skill and confidence. The experience was both humiliating and genuinely frightening. "What the hell are you?" Derek gasped, still struggling to regulate his breathing after Madison's precise strike to his solar plexus. Nobody learns to fight like that from watching movies or taking a few self-defense classes. Madison considered how much to reveal about her background. Part of her wanted to maintain the mystery that was clearly unsettling her opponents, but Another part recognized that understanding her credentials might convince them to abandon their harassment campaign permanently. 12 years of Taekwondo training, Madison said matter-of-factly. National junior champion for the last 3 years. Second-degree black belt as of 6 months ago. I've been competing against the best fighters in the country since I was 14. The revelation hit Derek's group like a physical blow. Kevin Walsh's mouth fell open as he processed the implications of Madison's credentials, while Brad Morrison unconsciously took a step backward despite already being pressed against the wall. Derek's expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been grudging respect. National champion? You're telling me we just tried to intimidate a professional fighter. I'm not professional, Madison corrected. But I am very, very good at what I do. And what I do is protect people who can't protect themselves from bullies who think gives them the right to hurt others. Brad Morrison pushed himself away from the wall, his face twisted with frustration and embarrassment. This is bullshit. She's just some girl from Austin who got lucky with a couple of moves. We can't let her punk us like this in our own school. The protest revealed the fundamental problem Derek's group was facing. Their entire social identity was built on being feared and respected, but Madison's decisive victory had shattered that carefully constructed image. More importantly, word of their defeat would inevitably spread throughout Jefferson High, undermining their ability to intimidate future victims. Kevin Walsh struggled to his feet, still favoring his midsection where Madison's kick had landed. Brad, man, I don't think you understand what just happened. She didn't get lucky. She completely destroyed us without even breaking a sweat. I've never seen anyone move that fast in real life. The testimony from Kevin carried particular weight because he had experienced Madison's skills directly. His admission that they had been outclassed might have ended the confrontation, if not for the approach of footsteps echoing from the main hallway. Derek's head snapped toward the sound, and Madison could see calculation replacing pain in his expression. Sounds like little Jessica found herself a teacher, he said with renewed confidence. This is about to get very interesting. Madison felt her stomach sink as she recognized the tactical implications of approaching adult intervention. If school authorities arrived while she was standing over 3 injured football players, the situation would be interpreted through the lens of institutional bias that favored athletic programs over individual students. Mr. Davis, the young physics teacher, rounded the corner at a fast walk with Jessica Chun close behind him. His expression shifted from concern to confusion as he took in the scene. Madison standing calmly in the center of the hallway while Derek, Brad, and Kevin displayed various degrees of physical distress. What's going on here? Mr. Davis demanded, his gaze moving between Madison and Derek's group as he tried to assess the situation. Jessica said there was some kind of confrontation, but nobody appears to be seriously injured. Derek Hamilton's expression transformed instantly from defeated bully to concerned victim, demonstrating the kind of manipulative skill that had probably served him well in previous encounters with authority figures. Thank goodness you're here, Mr. Davis, Derek said, his voice carrying just the right note of relieved gratitude. We were just trying to have a friendly conversation with the new student about school traditions when she completely lost control and attacked us. I think she might have some serious anger management issues. The lie was smoothly delivered and strategically brilliant. By casting Madison as the aggressor and himself as the reasonable victim, Derek was leveraging the unconscious bias that most adults harbored against believing that a small girl could defeat 3 larger boys in physical confrontation. Mr. Davis looked uncertain as he processed Derek's version of events. Madison could see him struggling to reconcile the evidence of his own eyes, 3 apparently injured football players and 1 completely unruffled girl, with the inherent implausibility of Derek's claims. Is that what happened here? Mr. Davis asked Madison directly, his tone suggesting he was hoping for a simple explanation that would allow him to avoid Dealing with a complex disciplinary situation, Madison faced a critical decision point. She could tell the truth about Derek's harassment of Jessica and her intervention to protect the sophomore, but doing so would require explaining how she had defeated 3 larger opponents without sustaining any injuries herself. That explanation would inevitably lead to questions about her martial arts background and potentially expose her family to unwanted attention. Alternatively, she could accept responsibility for the confrontation and hope that her status as a new student with no previous disciplinary record would result in relatively lenient consequences. The approach would protect Jessica from retaliation but would also allow Derek's group to claim victory in their propaganda war. These 3 were harassing Jessica, Madison said finally, deciding that protecting the sophomore was more important than protecting herself. They cornered her and were trying to force her to do humiliating things for their entertainment. When I asked them to leave her alone, they threatened me and then attacked me. I defended myself. Mr. Davis looked between Madison and Derek's group, clearly struggling with a situation that was beyond his experience as a young teacher. The competing narratives were impossible to reconcile without additional evidence, and the political implications of taking sides between a transfer student and 3 prominent athletes were obvious. Derek sensed Mr. Davis's uncertainty and pressed his advantage. "Sir, I know this looks bad, but we were literally just talking to Jessica about joining some school activities. She's been really isolated since she started here, and we thought it would be good for her to get more involved socially." The revised story was more subtle than Derek's initial claim, presenting their harassment as misguided but well-intentioned outreach. Combined with their injured condition and Madison's obvious physical capabilities, the narrative might be persuasive to an authority figure who wanted to avoid complicated investigations. Jessica Chun had remained silent during the exchange, but Madison could see her struggling with the same moral calculus that had initially paralyzed her during the harassment. Speaking up to support Madison would require contradicting 3 popular seniors, potentially making her a target for future retaliation. "Jessica," Mr. Davis said gently, recognizing that her testimony would be crucial in determining what had actually occurred. "Can you tell me what you saw here? I need to understand what really happened so I can make the right decisions about how to handle this." Jessica looked between Madison and Derek's group, her internal conflict evident in her expression. Madison could see the fear in the sophomore's eyes as she weighed the consequences of telling the truth against the safety of remaining silent. They were ... Jessica began, then stopped as Derek fixed her with a stare that carried an obvious threat of future consequences. "They were asking me about school activities, but I felt uncomfortable and wanted to leave. When Madison saw I was upset, she tried to help me." The compromise testimony was carefully crafted to acknowledge Madison's protective intervention while avoiding direct accusations against Derek's group. It was probably the best Jessica could manage given her vulnerable position, but it left significant ambiguity about who had initiated the physical confrontation. Mr. Davis nodded slowly, apparently hoping that Jessica's moderate account would allow him to resolve the situation without taking definitive action against any of the students involved. However, Brad Morrison's frustration with the careful diplomatic language finally overrode his strategic thinking. "This is ridiculous." Brad exploded, his anger getting the better of his judgment. "We're supposed to pretend that some 90-pound transfer student beat up 3 varsity athletes? Nobody's going to believe that story, especially when they see the security footage from the hallway cameras." The mention of security cameras sent a visible shock through Derek's expression as he realized that Brad had just destroyed their carefully constructed narrative. If video evidence existed of the confrontation, it would clearly show Derek's group as the aggressors and Madison as defending herself and Jessica. Mr. Davis's demeanor shifted immediately as he processed the implications of Brad's outburst. "Security footage? Are you saying this confrontation was recorded?" Madison felt a surge of relief as she realized that objective evidence might exist to support her version of events. The presence of security cameras would not only vindicate her actions, but would also provide proof of Derek's group's systematic harassment of Jessica. Derek shot Brad a look of pure fury before attempting damage control. What Brad means is that we hope the cameras will show how unprovoked her attack was. We were just standing there talking when she went crazy and started hitting us. But the damage was done. Mr. Davis now understood that verifiable evidence existed, which meant that any attempt to cover up or minimize the incident would likely be exposed. His expression grew more serious as he contemplated the administrative and legal implications of the situation. "I think we need to continue this conversation in the principal's office," Mr. Davis said firmly. "All of you. And we're definitely going to be reviewing whatever security footage is available." As the group began moving toward the main office, Madison caught Jessica's eye and gave her a small nod of encouragement. The sophomore managed a grateful smile in return, and Madison could see that some of Jessica's fear had been replaced by a tentative hope that the harassment she had endured might finally be coming to an end. Derek Hamilton's reign of terror at Jefferson High School was about to face its first serious challenge from the administrative system he had manipulated so successfully in the past. And this time, there would be video evidence to ensure that the truth couldn't be hidden or distorted. The real reckoning was just beginning. Principal Margaret Sullivan's office was a study in institutional authority, with diplomas and commendations covering one wall while photographs of successful Jefferson High graduates adorned another. At 58, she had been leading the school for 12 years and had developed a reputation for fairness, tempered by political pragmatism, that kept the district's wealthy donors satisfied. Madison found herself seated in one of 4 chairs, arranged in a semicircle facing Principal Sullivan's imposing oak desk. To her left sat Jessica Chun, still visibly shaken but showing more resolve than she had displayed during the hallway confrontation. Derek Hamilton occupied the chair to Madison's right, his confident demeanor restored now that they were in an environment where his family's influence traditionally held sway. Brad Morrison and Kevin Walsh sat slightly behind the main group, both looking uncomfortable as they waited for the administrative process to unfold. Mr. Davis stood near the door, having provided his initial account of discovering the aftermath of the confrontation in the science wing hallway. "Before we begin," Principal Sullivan announced, her tone suggesting years of experience with similar disciplinary situations, "I want everyone to understand that this incident will be investigated thoroughly and impartially. Violence of any kind is not tolerated at Jefferson High School, regardless of the circumstances that may have led to it." The statement was diplomatically neutral, but Madison caught the subtle emphasis on violence of any kind. That suggested the principal was already operating under the assumption that physical force had been inappropriately used by someone in the room. Derek leaned forward slightly, his body language conveying respectful attention while his expression remained innocently confused. "Principal Sullivan, I want to start by saying how grateful we are that you're handling this personally. This whole situation has been really traumatic for all of us, especially Jessica." The calculated reference to Jessica was strategically brilliant, positioning Derek as someone concerned for the sophomore's welfare while implying that Madison's intervention had somehow made the situation worse rather than better. "Why don't we start with you, Derek?" Principal Sullivan said, opening a leather portfolio and preparing to take notes. "Please tell me, in your own words, what happened in the science wing this afternoon." Derek's account was a masterpiece of selective truth and subtle manipulation. He acknowledged that he and his friends had approached Jessica to discuss her potential participation in school activities, admitted that she had seemed reluctant to engage in conversation, and expressed regret that their outreach efforts had apparently been misinterpreted as harassment. "When the new student arrived," Derek continued, his tone suggesting puzzled innocence, We tried to explain that we were just being friendly and welcoming to Jessica. But instead of giving us a chance to clarify the situation, she immediately became hostile and accused us of bullying. When we tried to defend ourselves verbally, she attacked us without any warning. The narrative was carefully constructed to cast Derek's group as well-intentioned victims of Madison's misunderstanding and aggression. By acknowledging some elements of the truth while reframing the context and motivations, Derek was creating a plausible alternative version of events that would be difficult to disprove without objective evidence. Principal Sullivan nodded as she took notes, her expression remaining neutral despite the inherent implausibility of Derek's claims about being physically overpowered by a girl half his size. Madison realized that the principal was probably accustomed to Derek's ability to present convincing explanations for problematic situations. "Madison," Principal Sullivan said, turning her attention to the transfer student, "I'd like to hear your version of what occurred. Please take your time and be as specific as possible." Madison had spent the walk to the office considering how to present her account in a way that would be both truthful and credible. The challenge was explaining her defensive capabilities without appearing to boast, while also making it clear that Derek's group had been the clear aggressors in the situation. "When I came around the corner from my locker," Madison began, her voice steady and measured, "I saw Derek, Brad, and Kevin surrounding Jessica near the science wing exit. They were blocking her path and demanding that she curtsy to them as some kind of demonstration of respect. Jessica was clearly frightened and trying to leave, but they wouldn't let her pass." Principal Sullivan's pen paused momentarily as she processed Madison's description of the curtsy demand, her expression suggesting that this particular detail struck her as both specific and disturbing enough to be credible. Madison continued her account, describing her intervention on Jessica's behalf, Derek's escalating threats, and the physical confrontation that had resulted when the boys refused to allow Jessica to leave peacefully. She was careful to emphasize that she had used only the minimum force necessary to defend herself and Jessica, but she also made it clear that her training had prepared her to handle multiple attackers effectively. "Training?" Principal Sullivan asked, her interest clearly piqued by Madison's reference to her background. "What kind of training are we talking about?" "I've been studying Taekwondo for 12 years, Madison explained. "I'm a second-degree black belt and have competed nationally for the past 3 years. My family moved here from Austin, where I trained at one of the top martial arts academies in Texas." The revelation of Madison's credentials sent a visible shock through Derek's confident demeanor. He had clearly been hoping that Madison would downplay her abilities, allowing him to maintain his narrative about being victimized by an unprovoked attack from an untrained opponent. Principal Sullivan set down her pen and studied Madison with newfound interest. "National competitor? Are we talking about actual championship-level competition?" "Yes, ma'am," Madison confirmed. "I've won gold medals at tournaments in Texas, Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Colorado. My instructor was a former Olympic competitor who specialized in training elite athletes." The specificity of Madison's credentials made Derek's story increasingly difficult to maintain. The idea that a nationally ranked martial artist would launch an unprovoked attack on 3 larger opponents was inherently implausible, especially given Madison's calm and respectful demeanor throughout the interview process. Kevin Walsh had been growing more agitated as Madison's account directly contradicted the narrative Derek had carefully constructed. His limited intelligence and poor impulse control finally overrode whatever strategic thinking he possessed. "She's lying about everything," Kevin burst out, his voice cracking with frustrated anger. "We weren't harassing anybody. We were just having some fun with Jessica, trying to teach her some social skills. Then this crazy martial arts chick shows up and starts beating the crap out of us for no reason." The outburst was devastating to Derek's position because it inadvertently confirmed several key elements of Madison's account while revealing the callous attitude that Derek had been trying to conceal. The phrase, "having some fun with Jessica," particularly undermined any claims that their interaction had been well-intentioned outreach. Derek shot Kevin a look of pure fury, but the damage was already done. Principal Sullivan's expression had shifted from neutral fact-finding to something approaching stern disapproval as she processed the implications of Kevin's admission. "Mr. Walsh," Principal Sullivan said coldly, "did you just refer to harassing another student as having some fun? Because that's certainly how your statement sounded to me." Kevin's face went pale as he realized his mistake. "No, ma'am, that's not what I meant. I just ... We were trying to help Jessica fit in better, and—" "That's enough," Principal Sullivan interrupted, her tone making it clear that Kevin had already said more than enough to damage his position. She turned her attention to Jessica, who had been following the exchange with growing confidence as Derek's story began to unravel. "Jessica, I need you to tell me exactly what happened from your perspective. And I want you to know that there will be no retaliation for anything you say here today. That's a promise from me personally." Jessica took a deep breath, and Madison could see her gathering the courage to finally speak the complete truth about her experiences with Derek's group. "They've been bothering me for weeks," Jessica said quietly but clearly. "Not just today, but lots of times. They call me names, knock my books down, and make fun of my family. Today they cornered me and said I had to curtsy to them like a servant, and when I refused, they said they were going to make me do worse things." The testimony was devastating because it revealed a pattern of ongoing harassment rather than an isolated incident that could be dismissed as a misunderstanding. More importantly, Jessica's description of the curtsy demand perfectly corroborated Madison's account while completely undermining Derek's claims about friendly outreach. Principal Sullivan was taking detailed notes as Jessica continued her statement, describing months of systematic intimidation that had made her afraid to walk through certain parts of the school. The sophomore's courage in finally speaking up seemed to grow stronger as she realized that adults were actually listening to her concerns. "When Madison stepped in to help me," Jessica concluded, "Derek and his friends got angry and threatened her. When she wouldn't back down, they attacked her first. She was just defending herself and trying to protect me." The room fell silent as Principal Sullivan finished her notes and considered the conflicting accounts she had heard. Madison could see Derek's confidence evaporating as he realized that his carefully constructed narrative had been systematically dismantled by Kevin's outburst and Jessica's detailed testimony. "Mr. Hamilton," Principal Sullivan said slowly, her tone suggesting that her patience with Derek's manipulation was finally exhausted, "your account of these events differs substantially from what I've heard from both Madison and Jessica. Do you have anything to add that might explain these discrepancies?" Derek's mind was clearly racing as he tried to salvage his position, but the foundation of his story had been too thoroughly undermined to support any credible defense. "Principal Sullivan, I think Jessica is confused about what happened, and the new girl is obviously trying to make herself look like some kind of hero." The response was weak and desperate, lacking the smooth confidence that had characterized Derek's earlier statements. Principal Sullivan's expression suggested that she was no longer finding his explanations persuasive. "Before we go any further," Principal Sullivan announced, reaching for her phone, "I think we should review the security footage from the science wing. Mr. Davis mentioned that cameras may have recorded this incident, and I believe objective evidence would be helpful in determining exactly what occurred." Derek's face went ashen as he realized that video evidence would expose every lie he had told during the investigation. The security footage would clearly show his group cornering Jessica, Madison's intervention on the sophomore's behalf, and the subsequent physical confrontation that Derek had initiated. Within 10 minutes, the school's head of security had arrived with a laptop containing the relevant video files. Principal Sullivan positioned the screen, so that everyone in the room could see the footage, then pressed play on the digital recording of the science wing hallway. The video was devastating to Derek's position. It clearly showed his group surrounding Jessica in a threatening manner, Madison's calm intervention, Derek's aggressive escalation of the confrontation, and the physical attack that had resulted in Derek, Brad, and Kevin being decisively defeated by Madison's superior training and technique. Most damning of all, the audio clearly captured Derek's demand that Jessica curtsy to demonstrate proper respect, Kevin's crude comments about teaching her social skills, and Brad's explicit threats when Madison refused to be intimidated. "Well," Principal Sullivan said after the video concluded, her voice carrying a note of barely controlled anger, "I think that settles any questions about what actually happened in the science wing today." She turned her full attention to Derek, and Madison could see that the principal's diplomatic neutrality had been replaced by genuine outrage at the systematic harassment that had been revealed. "Mr. Hamilton, in my 12 years as principal of this school, I have rarely encountered such a clear-cut case of bullying, intimidation, and physical assault. The video evidence directly contradicts virtually every statement you made during this investigation." Derek opened his mouth to protest, but Principal Sullivan held up a hand to silence him. Furthermore, Ms. Chun's testimony about ongoing harassment suggests that this incident is part of a pattern of behavior that has been occurring under my watch without my knowledge. That stops today. The principal's tone made it clear that Derek's reign of terror at Jefferson High School was finally coming to an end. Madison felt a surge of satisfaction as she realized that the institutional protection Derek had relied on for so long was evaporating in the face of undeniable evidence. "As for you, Madison," Principal Sullivan continued, her expression softening slightly, "while I cannot officially condone violence under any circumstances, the video clearly shows that you acted in defense of another student who was being threatened and intimidated. Your actions likely prevented Ms. Chun from suffering further harassment." The acknowledgement felt like vindication for Madison's decision to intervene, despite the personal risk to her carefully maintained anonymity. More importantly, it represented institutional recognition that protecting vulnerable students was more important than maintaining false peace through willful ignorance. Principal Sullivan's final words to Derek were delivered with the kind of cold authority that made it clear his privileged position at Jefferson High had permanently ended. "Mr. Hamilton, you and your friends will be facing suspension, possible expulsion, and criminal charges for assault. Your parents have been contacted and are on their way to the school. I suggest you use the time before they arrive to consider how you'll explain your behavior to them." As Derek slumped in his chair, finally understanding that his manipulation tactics had failed completely, Madison felt the deep satisfaction that came from seeing justice finally served to someone who had abused their power for far too long. Reign of terror was over. 3 weeks after the confrontation in the science wing, Jefferson High School felt like a completely different institution. The morning hallways buzzed with a new energy as students walked with more confidence, their conversations lighter and their interactions more genuine than they had been in years. Madison Parker stood at her locker, organizing her books for another day of classes, still adjusting to the dramatic changes her intervention had triggered throughout the school community. The shy transfer student who had hoped to maintain anonymity had instead become a reluctant symbol of standing up to injustice, her reputation spreading far beyond Jefferson High's walls. The immediate aftermath of Derek Hamilton's exposure had been swift and decisive. Principal Sullivan had followed through on her promises with unprecedented thoroughness, implementing changes that addressed not just the individual perpetrators, but the systemic issues that had allowed their behavior to flourish unchecked for so long. Derek himself had been expelled immediately after the security footage review, his parents' attempts to leverage their financial influence falling on deaf ears as Principal Sullivan made it clear that the school's reputation for protecting bullies was ending permanently. The criminal assault charges filed by the district attorney had resulted in Derek being sentenced to community service and mandatory anger management counseling. Brad Morrison and Kevin Walsh had received suspensions that would keep them out of school until after the winter break, with their return contingent upon completing extensive counseling and agreeing to strict behavioral contracts that would result in immediate expulsion for any future infractions. More significantly, the coaching staff had been put on notice that athletic achievement would no longer provide immunity from disciplinary consequences. Coach Peterson, whose favoritism had enabled Derek's group for years, was now under administrative review and facing potential termination for his failure to address systematic harassment within his program. The ripple effects had extended throughout Jefferson High's social ecosystem. Students who had previously felt powerless against the established hierarchy were beginning to find their voices. Reporting incidents that had been tolerated for too long and demanding accountability from both peers and administrators. Jessica Chun exemplified this transformation. The once terrified sophomore now walked through the hallways with visible confidence, her academic achievements finally receiving the recognition they deserved without fear of retaliation from athletic bullies. She had become student government vice president and was spearheading an anti-bullying initiative that was gaining support from both students and faculty. Madison, Jessica called out as she approached the lockers, her smile bright and genuine. "I wanted to catch you before the first period." The student council approved our proposal for the peer mediation program, and Principal Sullivan wants to meet with us this afternoon to discuss implementation. The peer mediation program had been Madison's suggestion, drawing on her martial arts training's emphasis on conflict resolution through understanding rather than domination. The initiative would train student volunteers to help resolve disputes before they escalated to harassment or violence, creating a support network that had been desperately needed at Jefferson High. Tyler Rodriguez joined them at Madison's locker, carrying a newspaper with a prominent article about Jefferson High's anti-bullying reforms. The story had attracted attention from other school districts throughout Texas, with several administrators visiting to learn about the comprehensive changes that had transformed the school's culture in just 3 weeks. "You're famous, Tyler," announced with a grin, holding up the newspaper's front page. The Austin American-Statesman picked up the story about how a transfer student's intervention led to the most comprehensive anti-bullying reform in Central Texas history. Madison examined the article with mixed feelings. The publicity had brought positive attention to the school's reforms, but it had also made her the center of unwanted media attention that conflicted with her preference for privacy. Interview requests from local television stations and martial arts magazines had been politely declined, though Madison had agreed to speak with the school newspaper about the importance of standing up for others. The transformation extended beyond individual students to the institutional culture itself. Teachers who had previously looked the other way when witnessing harassment were now required to complete mandatory training on recognizing and addressing bullying behavior. New policies had been implemented that provided clear consequences for both perpetrators and faculty members who failed to intervene appropriately. Amanda Foster, Madison's lab partner from biology class, approached their group with news that illustrated the depth of the changes occurring throughout the school. "Did you hear about what happened in Mrs. Rodriguez's chemistry class yesterday? Some senior tried to intimidate one of the freshmen into doing his homework, and 3 different students immediately spoke up to stop it. The senior backed down without even trying to argue." The incident represented exactly the kind of cultural shift Madison had hoped her intervention might inspire. Students were no longer willing to be passive observers to bullying, creating a community where harassment was met with immediate resistance rather than silent complicity. Madison's own integration into Jefferson High's social fabric had evolved in unexpected ways. Rather than being feared or treated as an outsider, She had found herself surrounded by students who appreciated her willingness to use her abilities to protect others. The robotics team had recruited her for her analytical thinking, while the debate team valued her calm confidence under pressure. Most surprisingly, several students had approached Madison about learning martial arts themselves. Her suggestion that they contact local taekwondo schools had led to increased enrollment at 3 different academies in the Clearwater area, creating a network of students who were developing both physical skills and the philosophical framework that made those skills meaningful. Dr. Sarah Parker had been both proud and concerned about her daughter's newfound prominence at Jefferson High. During a family dinner the previous weekend, she had expressed admiration for Madison's courage while worrying about the pressure that came with being seen as a guardian figure by her classmates. "I'm proud of what you've accomplished," Sarah had said while they cleaned up after their meal, "but I want you to remember that you can't solve everyone's problems. It's wonderful that you've inspired other students to stand up for themselves, but you shouldn't feel responsible for protecting the entire school." Madison had understood her mother's concerns, but she had also come to accept that her intervention had created responsibilities she couldn't simply ignore. Students who had been victims of harassment continued to approach her for advice and support, and she had found herself becoming an unofficial advocate for kids who felt powerless against systemic problems. The role was challenging but also deeply fulfilling. Master Chun's teachings about using strength to protect others had found practical application in ways Madison had never anticipated when she was competing in tournaments or practicing forms in the dojo. Mr. Davis, the young physics teacher who had first responded to the science wing confrontation, had become one of Madison's strongest supporters within the faculty. His classroom had become an informal gathering place for students involved in the peer mediation program, and he frequently sought Madison's input on conflicts that arose during his classes. "You've given us all a master class in moral courage," Mr. Davis had told Madison during a recent conversation about the mediation program. "Most adults twice your age wouldn't have had the strength to intervene the way you did, especially knowing it would expose them to potential retaliation." The comment had resonated with Madison because it captured something she was still processing about her experience at Jefferson High. Standing up to Derek's group had required not just physical courage, but moral courage, the willingness to do what was right despite personal cost and uncertain outcomes. Principal Sullivan had implemented several policy changes that institutionalized the lessons learned from Derek's exposure. A new anonymous reporting system allowed students to report harassment without fear of retaliation, while regular surveys tracked the school climate and identified problems before they could escalate to violence. Most importantly, the administration had acknowledged that athletic achievement could no longer serve as a shield for problematic behavior. New standards required coaches to address character development alongside physical training, with regular evaluations ensuring that sports programs contributed positively to the school's culture rather than undermining it. The changes hadn't been universally popular. Some parents who had enjoyed their children's privileged status within the old system had complained about the new accountability measures, while a few students resented the loss of social advantages they had previously taken for granted. However, the overwhelming response from the Jefferson High community had been positive. Test scores had improved as students felt safer and more engaged in their learning, while college recruiters had begun praising the school's character development programs alongside its academic achievements. Madison's taekwondo training had resumed at a local academy run by Master Kim, a former student of Master Chun who had been delighted to continue Madison's development toward her third-degree black belt. The new training environment had provided Madison with both physical challenge and philosophical guidance as she processed her experiences at Jefferson High. "Your intervention was perfectly executed," Master Kim had observed during a recent sparring session. "You used minimum necessary force, protected the innocent, and created positive change that extended far beyond the immediate situation." Master Chun would be very proud of how you applied his teachings. The validation from Master Kim had been particularly meaningful because it confirmed that Madison's actions had been consistent with the highest principles of martial arts. She hadn't simply won a fight, she had used her abilities to create lasting positive change in her community. As the semester drew toward its conclusion, Madison found herself reflecting on how dramatically her expectations for Jefferson High had been exceeded. What had begun as an attempt to complete her final 2 years of high school quietly had evolved into an experience that had shaped not just her own character, but the character of an entire institution. The peer mediation program was scheduled to begin after winter break, with Madison serving as one of the primary trainers for student volunteers. The curriculum would combine conflict resolution techniques with the philosophical principles that made peaceful solutions preferable to violent ones. Jessica Chun had submitted an application to become Madison's co-trainer. Her transformation from victim to advocate, serving as inspiration for other students who had previously felt powerless against harassment. The sophomore's courage in speaking truth during the investigation had established her as a natural leader whose voice carried moral authority throughout the school. Tyler Rodriguez had documented the entire transformation process for a project he was submitting to a national competition focused on community improvement initiatives. His comprehensive analysis of how a single act of moral courage had triggered systematic institutional change was attracting attention from educational researchers interested in replicating Jefferson High's success. The recognition felt surreal. To Madison, who continued to think of herself as simply someone who had done what needed to be done when confronted with injustice, the idea that her intervention had become a case study in effective anti-bullying advocacy was both humbling and inspiring. Looking back on her first day at Jefferson High, Madison could barely recognize the shy transfer student who had hoped to avoid attention and complete her education without complications. That girl had been transformed by circumstances that demanded she choose between personal safety and moral responsibility. The choice had been difficult, but Madison knew she would make the same decision again without hesitation. Master Chun's teachings about the responsibility that came with strength had been tested in the crucible of real-world conflict and had emerged proven and strengthened. As she walked toward her first period chemistry class on a crisp December morning, Madison felt genuine gratitude for the chain of events that had brought her family to Clearwater, Texas. What had seemed like an unwanted disruption to her carefully planned life had instead become an opportunity to discover the true meaning of strength, courage, and community. The hallways of Jefferson High buzzed with the energy of students who felt safe, supported, and empowered to stand up for what was right. It was exactly the kind of environment Madison had always hoped to help create, and she was proud to have played a role in making it reality. The transformation was complete, but the work of maintaining and expanding that positive change would continue for years to come. Madison was ready for whatever challenges that work might bring, secure in the knowledge that she had found her true calling as a guardian of those who needed protection and a voice for those who struggled to speak for themselves. In the end, the shy transfer student had become exactly what Jefferson High School had needed most: proof that one person's courage could change everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss